Today, I built my favorite drum bus of all time. And I did it with all stock plugins. Well, except for one plugin, but it's free. And I'm giving this away to anyone who wants it today. If you're in Ableton, you're in luck. You can just download this now. If you're not in Ableton, stick around because I'm going to be going through each setting in this, which you should be able to do in the stock plugins of your DAW. Before we get into the guts of this thing, let's take a listen to how it sounds. We'll start by playing it with it off. The hardest part about building this was not actually putting together the processing. That only took about 10 minutes. What was the hardest part about this was making sure that it was gain staged in a way that you could put this on all sorts of different material and you're not going to need to adjust the output or the input too much. The start of the chain is just a utility that I'm using as an input. Up next, I have a high pass. So what's going on here is I'm rolling off everything below 26 Hertz, but just a little bit. And as you turn this high pass on, it engages this device, and also it can roll all the way up to 51 Hertz or down. This can give you more headroom. It can also clean up your sound, but you don't have to use it. Let's take a listen as I sweep through. Very simple. I like to keep just a little bit on, so I'm just rolling off the very end. Next, I have a 3-band EQ. On this little channel EQ, super simple. I just cut the mids a little bit at 450, and I have the lows and the highs routed to this sub and highs knob. So that way you can add some shimmer or some low end, but I also routed the output of this to turn down as the low end increased so that the level didn't change too much. Next, we have our first compressor. So I use this multi-band compressor, and what I did is I have the highs and the mid frequencies engaged, but I have the lows turned off. Not that it's not getting the lows, it's just not compressing the lows. And I routed the amount knob of this compressor to the comp knob here. So as we bring that up, you can hear that the low end's not changing at all, but we are getting a more compressed high end. I like to just add this subtly. Next, we have parallel compression. And so in here, what I have is another channel EQ where I'm rolling off a lot of the lows, and then I have a glue compressor that I'm really slamming. So check out if we listen to what this parallel compression sounds like on its own. I'll turn it all the way up, and I'm going to solo the compression. Now, if I turn this back down, what I have is I have it starting from not being on at all to being at negative 13 dB in parallel. So the point of this is that you can add just a little taste of compression behind the drums, which I think beefs it up. Next, I have 2 reverbs. The first reverb, I'm cutting everything in the low end with an EQ before it hits the reverb, and then I use this preset dark snare room, and I routed the output of this to verb 1. So if we take a listen, super, super subtle, but it helps, I think, make this sound a little bit more polished. The next reverb's pretty similar, but it's a shorter reverb. Take a listen. So after the reverbs, we have this 3D section, which is an EQ8, which is cutting most of the low-end information, and then I'm using this roar distortion unit. This is just like a cool creative distortion to put in parallel behind your drums. Up next, we have a filter that I think sounds super dope. So it's pretty simple. It's basically just an EQ where the highs and the lows are coming in as you turn the knob up, or going out if you turn the knob down. Here's a post-compression EQ I put to control the low end again. I routed one of these bands to that same sub band here, so you're getting basically pre-sub boost and post-sub boost with this knob like this. I also added a band around 150, which is where a lot of kicks live, not always, but if you boost here, it's a subtle boost right around where your kick might be. Next is the punch section. This is the only section I didn't use a stock plugin for, but I used a free plugin, and I'm going to link this below. So make sure if you want this chain, you got to download this too for it to sound exactly like this. And what I did was I routed this punch knob to the attack and sustain. So as it goes up, the attack is increased, but the sustain goes down a little bit. The attack is more heavy-handed than the sustain though, if that makes sense. So let's take a listen as I add the punch. Up next is saturation, and I have two different saturators sandwiching this glue compressor. So we'll look at the first one, which I'm using the bass shaper, and this is brand new in Ableton 12.1, which came out today. So I'm actually pretty thankful it did, because it's sick. This is really tightening up that low end, giving a nice saturation to the whole sound, but it's not that intense. This is in tandem with that other saturator, which I'm using a wave shaper. Let's take a listen as I turn up and down the saturation. Subtle, but it's super nice. Now, in between these two, we have the glue compressor. I have this set just like I would any other bus compressor, a very fast release, a pretty slow attack, 4:1 ratio, and I just like to see that needle moving around 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction. I do have a sidechain, internal sidechain, not external, so the compressor is not reacting to anything below 160 Hertz. This really helps glue it, so that's why they call it a glue compressor. On here, the next steps are your input and output controls. Last, we have a clipper, and all I did was I routed the ceiling and a little bit of input gain to the clipper knob. So as we turn this up, the ceiling goes down. Let's listen as the clipper does its magic. All right, so I built this for drums, but it doesn't have to stop there. It sounds so fire on mixes too. All right, let's take a listen to this on the loudest part of this song. I level matched this, so keep in mind this is a lower true peak than with this on bypass. Let's take a listen with it off. Let's listen to it also on the vocal section.
Running, running, running for the hills 'cause I'm a sinner. You know I'm fine, swear to God, that's a sign that I'm a winner. And every time I look, every time I fall, I put it on myself, I put it in the song, I wrote it on the wall, and all it says is I'm a sinner. Put a spell on you. Put a spell on you.
Has some nice mojo. I maybe overdid it a little bit for this demonstration, but I think that saturation right here and the sub is really bringing out the low mids on this, especially on the vocals, and I think it sounds hella nice. Let's head back over to this first example, and I just want to show you the presets I have in here. So as I showed you before, I have the start here, which is going to be basically completely dry. Then I have pushed, which is pretty similar to my normal glue, but I increased the input and brought the output down. So it's driving this thing a little bit harder. Now we have the glue, which is a little bit less aggressive than that. I called this crispy crunchy, which this is using the 3D a little bit. I can turn it up so you can really hear it. You can see how creative you could get. All right, so the last one is the filter, which is just bringing you straight to that filter area. So with a click of a button, if your drums are sounding like this, so in the description, you can download this right now. Just remember, you need to get that transient shaper as well. It's a free plugin. This is a free chain. Enjoy it. I'll see you guys soon.